nerds, what's up? Today I'm going to recommend my favorite books that aren't fantasy or sci-fi or magical realism. See you after the jump. So let's be honest, I read like 90% fantasy most time, or like sci-fi, magical realism. That's what I like to read. I read as a hobby, and so I don't necessarily feel the need to read stuff I don't enjoy just because. However, on the flip side of that, being well-read is sort of important to me, and I do like to increase my knowledge about stuff. That's something I've always been interested in. I think it is my heart of a Ravenclaw that I always want to know more information. And so because of that, when I'm not reading fantasy, which is what I mostly enjoy, I do tend to gravitate towards things like nonfiction or classics because I feel like they will increase my knowledge either about the world around me or just by my knowledge of literary history. That being said, I don't think you should feel obligated to read something out of your favorite genre, especially if you view reading as a hobby. I think all reading is beneficial. And obviously as a huge fantasy reader, I'm gonna think that mostly. But I thought it would be fun today to talk about some of my very favorites that aren't fantasy, and maybe if you're in like a reading rut or something, you might enjoy some of these. So let's get into it. I'm gonna start off with some of my favorite nonfiction books. I'm gonna start with a book that I actually read extremely recently, and if you follow me on Instagram, I've been talking a lot about it, and that is Bad Blood by John Carreyrou. This book, for those who don't know, follows the story of Theranos, which is a Silicon Valley startup company that essentially lied to investors, got to a valuation of $9 billion before everything came crashing down and everyone realized it was all a lie. That's the simple synopsis. Now, I don't know if this book particularly interests me because I lived in Silicon Valley for 7 years, so I kind of lived that startup life, that tech hub life. For those of you who don't live in the United States and maybe have never heard of Silicon Valley, that is just the United States of America's tech hub. It's kind of where it's known. All of our big companies are there: Facebook, Google, Apple, those sorts of things, as well as startups. So this book was wild to me that someone and a company could get this far and fool this many people before it all came crashing down. And what's cool about this story is that John Carreyrou, the author, is actually the journalist who broke the story. So I found reading from his perspective very great, and I actually didn't know it till halfway through the book when that reveal is made, so that was very cool. Additionally, and this is something you'll know if you follow me on Instagram, the CEO of Theranos' name was Elizabeth Holmes, and I have just such a fascination with her. Talk about a villain. This is maybe why this nonfiction appeals maybe to a fantasy reader, because Elizabeth Holmes is just like a classic fantasy villain. She was charismatic. She thought she was going to change the world. She truly believed in what she was doing, yet she lied and hurt so many people in the process. And she was obviously such an intelligent person, and you just think if you had just made a few better choices, things might have turned out differently. Anyway, highly recommend this book. Cannot stop thinking about it, and it's also a super fast read. The next book also sort of follows our health theme, and that is The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, which is by Rebecca Skloot. Now, this book is pretty famous, so you may have heard of it before. I highly recommend it. It follows the story of Henrietta Lacks's family. So Henrietta Lacks was a woman who had cells taken from her without her consent, and her cells, something about them, have replicated in such a way that, I mean, countless medical discoveries have been made using her cells. That's like the simple story of it. And it's about how her family pretty much lives in poverty, and do they deserve the right to some of the money that has been made off of their family members' cells, especially when they were given without consent. It's a super fascinating story, and I really liked the intersection of the personable, like you are rooting for this family, you want them to have, you know, some recompense, but also how the author weaves in the questions of what belongs to us medically and medical research. I found it a fascinating nonfiction. I highly recommend it. I think this would be good for somebody who maybe is interested in medical stuff but needs a little bit more like human interest pieces, because this focuses a lot on the human. Anyway, very, very great book. The next book I have on my list is Educated by Tara Westover. Again, another book you've probably heard of before. This one is a memoir, so I don't know if it really belongs in nonfiction. I mean, it is nonfiction. It's a memoir. And it is about her life growing up in an extreme religious family, an evangelical Christian family. Well, not evangelical is probably the wrong word, like a family who takes it too far, who's very crazy. And her struggles from going to basically being homeschooled, but in a bad way, like completely non-educated way to getting a PhD and everything that she had to go through. And her family was also abusive. So just all of that. I found this story of her life absolutely gripping. I don't want to talk about, some of the stuff is a good reveal, so I don't want to talk about it, but some of the stuff she did not know being raised in that way was shocking to me. And just seeing how she had to come out of this, the way she was raised to become educated, is just such a moving story. And also kind of like fast-paced and almost thriller in some places. Like, I don't know. I really recommend it. If you like hearing about people's lives, it's a great memoir. I actually don't even read that many memoirs, but that one was really good. Completely changing tacks on my nonfiction, let's talk about Moneyball. So if you follow me on Instagram, you know I asked for nonfiction recommendations and I said absolutely no sports stories. I don't care about sports stories. I'm just gonna be forward. I am the typical engineer reader who just doesn't really care about sports. I like watching sports sometimes, but yeah, I'm not that big. I especially don't care about baseball. To a couple of my friends, sadness. But I watched the movie Moneyball and was really interested because it's about statistics. And if there's one thing I love, it's statistics. And it is about, I think it's been a while since I read it. So I think it's about the owner of the Oakland A's in an earlier time period and how he used statistics to choose the people he took from the draft and how it made his team amazing by ignoring the sentimental or what we think and just looking at the hard numbers. Now, this was a book I found fascinating for that reason because I love statistics, and reading about how he manipulated these numbers and this data to get a winning team was so fascinating to me. So I think if you are a math nerd like I am, you would enjoy this book, but also if you like sports, particularly baseball, I think this could also be kind of like a different twist on sports stories. So I highly recommend this one. Oh, I didn't say, it's by Michael Lewis, by the way. This last book, I'm not sure where to put. It is nonfiction, but sort of isn't. It is called In the Shadow of the Banyan Tree. This book is about a girl's journey during the Cambodian genocide in the 70s. And she calls it a novelization of her experiences. Every experience in the book happened, but she said because she was so young, it's hard for her to remember the exact order that events happened. So for that reason, she feels like she can't say it is a straight memoir, but rather how she remembers these events through her 7-year-old's eyes. So all the events are true. So just kind of like, it's a weird thing between fiction and nonfiction for that reason. However, if you like prose, the writing of this book is simply beautiful. It blew me away. It is also the saddest book I think I have ever read. I do not cry very often in general. Do not cry during books. And when I was reading this, it was a long time ago. It was almost like a decade. My husband came home one day and I was like sobbing on the couch and he was like, "What happened? Like, who died?" I was like, "This book is so sad." It's sadder because it's true and it happened, and it's shocking to me that I got through so much of my life without hearing about this, especially with how recently it happened. And we had a chance to visit Cambodia 4 or 5 years ago. And so I liked that I had read that book so that I had all this knowledge when I going in, and kind of getting to study their history there was very moving. But this is a great kind of blend if you like history and moving stories and really understanding that stuff. I highly, highly recommend this book. Okay, let's move on to fiction. I have 3 books under the fiction category, the first being Daisy Jones and the Six. This book is something I didn't think I'd enjoy. Just didn't seem necessarily my thing, but so many people were raving about this book, and I do get Book of the Month, and it was one of the books I could get for Book of the Month because I think it won Book of the Year, or it was finalist the year it came out. So I was like, okay, everyone's raving about this book, let's get it. Okay guys, it was amazing. I loved it. It was definitely not in my normal wheelhouse. It follows essentially a band through their kind of like one-hit wonder days. If you guys seen the movie That Thing You Do.
The Oneaters.
I grew up with that movie. I love that movie. Similar vibes, way darker. Darker That Thing You Do. But it is all told through interviews, which may sound like something you wouldn't like. I personally loved it. I really liked the interesting narrative of just only hearing basically through dialogue. It was a very interesting human interest story. I read it so fast. If you're looking for something just a little different, something fast-paced to get you out of your rut, and you think you could be up for a fiction like this, following this band, I recommend it. I really, really enjoyed it. I think I gave it 4.5 stars. Like, it was super good. The next book maybe cheats a little bit. I think you could kind of put it into magical realism. You probably could, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. It is Slaughterhouse 5 by Kurt Vonnegut. This is, I guess I could consider this a classic, maybe not even just fiction. It's definitely in that dystopian classics that are often mentioned with like Brave New World, 1984, Animal House, you know, those books that make a commentary on our world. And I had heard about this one. I think this one's divisive. People either think it's super bizarre and weird and hate it, or they just kind of, it clicks for them and they get it and they love it. For me, it clicked for me. It's really exploring the products of war, the effects of war on this character. And it is the way that this character visualizes PTSD that just clicked for me. And it does go into that magical realism territory because this person is processing their PTSD from the war through fake time travel, basically. And the way that weaved together, I just thought it was extremely profound. I was not expecting it to be as profound as it was. So if you like those kind of dystopian classics, or you want to read a book that's kind of in our zeitgeist, I highly recommend Slaughterhouse 5. I think it's one of my favorites of those sorts of books. And I think for us fantasy lovers, because we're already more accepting of kind of weird narrative things to explain a point, I think this could really resonate with you as a fantasy reader. This is another classic. It's a Jane Austen. I'm going to tell you to read Pride and Prejudice. Now, I read this a long time ago. I mean, I've read it a few times, but the first time I ever read it, I was pretty young. I think I was in 5th grade, and I still love reading it every once in a while. Now, I grew up in a family who loved Jane Austen, and I'm not as well read of Jane Austen as I wish to be. I think I've only read 3 of her books. In fact, I think one of my New Year's goals next year is going to be read more Jane Austen, because I've seen so many of the movie adaptations of it. But Pride and Prejudice is my favorite. I know that's not often for a lot of people, but I just still love it. And I know you're probably like, okay, it's Jane Austen's like a girly author, but her stuff is good. Give it a chance. I think you might like it more than you think. It is a classic. She is one of the most prominent female authors, I feel like, in our zeitgeist as a culture. And Pride and Prejudice is good stuff, and you can read it and then you can go watch the BBC miniseries that they did on this, which I think personally is the best adaptation of a book that I have ever seen. I love it so much. Probably one of my favorite movies of all time. I watch it all the time. My best story about this, because people again think it's girly, like my dad loves it, and I remember my husband was sick once and we had it on for some reason, and then I left the room and I came back and I was like, oh, he had watched like 3 of the 6 episodes, and I was like, oh, we can turn this off. Sorry, I just like left it on. He's like, no, it's okay. I might as well just, keep watching it. And I was like, okay, see, you like it. It's really, really good. It's a good story. So, and that's come from someone who does not like romantic stories. Like and this is a romance. Like we all know that Pride and Prejudice is a romance. And I think because it's written with so much humor and snark, and also has the kind of romance I like, which is really more about personalities than anything else, that it works so well for me. The last book I'm going to recommend is a historical fiction book, which is surprising because I usually claim historical fiction is my least favorite genre after romance. There's just something about historical fiction that doesn't necessarily resonate with me, just not my favorite, which I know surprised a lot of people. I think historical fiction is a very popular genre, just not necessarily for me. But I was recommended this book by a friend who I trusted, and I read it, named Code Name Verity. And it ended up being one of my top 5 books of the year I read it. I think I read it in 2019. This book is just fantastic. It does take place during World War II, which I feel like all historical fictions take place. I know that's not true, but it just feels like all the popular ones are in World War II, which is also why I tend to avoid it, because I feel like they hit a lot of the same things. But this one is about a female friendship, and this awesome friendship they develop while they are very active participants in the war. And the story that it weaves together is just so brilliant. It is a mystery, and the characters are just so vibrant and lovable. I highly recommend, especially if you like historical fiction, or even if you don't, because I liked historical fiction. I liked the mystery aspect of it. I really like the characters, and I'm a sucker for great friendships, and this duo is such a great friendship duo. So if you're somebody who likes a little mystery, you like friendship duos, I highly recommend you trying this book. It's another short one that's a super fast read. Okay, so that's it today for some of my favorite non-fantasy or sci-fi or magical realism books. I obviously have a lot more that I really love. I just think these ones have the widest appeal and maybe would be the most interesting to other fantasy lovers. So let me know below, what are your favorite books to read when you're just feeling like you need a little break from fantasy. I would like to hear them because I always like to try to expand my reading. And let me know if you've read any of these. I know they're all pretty popular books, and tell me what you thought about them, if you loved them as much as me or if you didn't like them at all. I want to discuss about it. in the comment section below. And as always, if you like this video, please like and subscribe. And if you want to see what I'm currently reading along with other nerdy rants, you can follow me on Instagram at bookborn.reviews. I'll see you next time. Bye.